Welcome to the Preferred Walk-On Show. I'm your host, Seth Saunders, and we have a very special guest this week. As the road to Omaha gets started, we could not think of anyone better to have on than Olivia Sayer of Dawgs 24/7. If anybody knows Dawgs baseball, it is her. So we want to get her inside scoop on the Athens Regional this week and all things college baseball. So Olivia, welcome to the show. We're delighted to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So first thing I want to ask you is, I feel like the big story from Selection Monday is SEC dominance in the 64-team field. 13 teams in, 6 of the top 8 seeds hailing from the Southeastern Conference. You have seen teams all across the conference this year. Were you surprised by that number? What was your biggest takeaway when the field was announced?
Not at all. I was not surprised, not even close to surprised. I just think watching the SEC this season, yes, in my opinion, it's definitely been the most dominant conference this season. But I also think with the addition of Texas, you look at what it did in the regular season, how impressive that was. With the addition of Oklahoma, who's no slouch itself, I mean, it came to Athens and gave Georgia 3 really good games. I think this might be the best SEC you look from top to bottom, obviously with the exception of Missouri, South Carolina. A&M obviously didn't have a season that we thought it was going to have, but definitely,
Mm-hmm.
probably, in my opinion, the strongest conference we've seen in a while. So I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, top to bottom. I mean, what a meat grinder to have to go through that SEC schedule, regardless of who you draw. I want to pivot off because you brought up two teams that I think have interesting storylines this year, and that's Texas and Texas A&M, right? What a difference 11 months can make. You've got Jim Schlossnagle, who had such great success at Texas A&M, takes him to the doorstep of a national title last year, then leaves to go to Texas with the connections to Chris Del Conte, all those things. A lot of controversy. Thought he had a lot of mud on his face with how things went last year, and probably rightfully so. I think probably how he answered the press conference wasn't the best. However, you fast forward out to now, and Texas sits there as the number 2 national seed, 42 wins. Texas A&M starts out as preseason number 1, has injury after injury after injury, never can put it together, don't make the NCAA tournament, and now you're looking at early maybe being out after 1 year. So what are your thoughts on that and kind of how all that sits now a year later?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of funny. Yes, on one hand, Texas came in and had all this success, but on the other, you look at where it got its coaching staff from, and like you just mentioned, that is Texas A&M. So I believe having that experience, having a guy like Jim Schlossnagle at the helm, a guy that's been in this league, a guy that's seen the ups and downs in this league, obviously performed really well with Texas A&M. I think that's been a little underrated as far as what he's brought to the program. I know he practically depleted A&M's pitching staff, or not pitching
Mm-hmm.
staff, entire staff except for early. So I think what they've done has been impressive. And then as far as A&M, like you kind of just mentioned, I think it was the injuries. I think it was taking some time to get acclimated to a new head coach. Albeit he has been a part of the program, it was his first head coaching stint. So there's so many different things that you don't even take into account when you're just a hitting coach, whether it's the organization aspect that you have to lead, the recruiting aspect, you're now heading all of that. So I just think there was a lot there that it took A&M a little while to unpack. And credit to them, it really turned the season around. It was just that sweep at Missouri that really did it in.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how all that played out. And really in college baseball in general, right? You have two of the teams that people thought before the season started that were going to be right there when this road to Omaha starts in Texas A&M and UVA, and then neither one end up in the tournament. It's just one of those things where we can try to predict it on paper all we want, but you got to roll the balls out there and play it, and it kind of turned on its head. With the seeding with the SEC, and obviously I know you probably have a little bit of bias because you're covering the Dogs and you see them the most, but I found it a little bit surprising, given the regular season results, given the head-to-head matchups, that Auburn received a higher national seed than the Dogs. What were your thoughts on that? Did that strike you as a little odd when the committee announced that?
I was definitely surprised. I was actually driving to Foley Field when they announced the top 4. Opened Twitter, saw something about Auburn's in the top 4, was like, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. So refreshed it and it was still there. But I think the number one strength of schedule is probably what gave it that top 4 seeding. Its RPI was a little bit lower than Georgia, definitely higher than South Carolina. Believe it was Vandy, Georgia, Auburn, if I'm not mistaken, in RPI. But I think the committee, especially with the host seeds the night before, showed us that it really does value that RPI. So Auburn had strong there. Believe it was 16 quad one wins. Georgia went 11-11 in quad one. And then, like I just mentioned, that number one strength of schedule is what I thought at the end of the day probably warranted it being in the top four in the committee's mind. In my mind, I probably would have put Georgia a little bit higher than Auburn just because it also swept Auburn at Foley Field in 3 games. And I even would have given North Carolina a shot to be a little bit higher just looking at the season it has had, what it did in the tournament, the regular season. It was really impressive. So to answer your question, I was definitely really surprised that Auburn was in the top four.
Yeah, North Carolina is a good pull. The other one that struck me a little bit was Coastal. I felt like Coastal at the 13 slot was maybe a little low. And I can tell you, if I was a Auburn fan, I would not want to see the Chanticleers weekend two. I feel like that's a tough matchup if they end up getting that draw. Well, let's talk about this UGA team. I think they are fascinating for a lot of reasons, right? They have a great year last year in year one under Wes Johnson, 43 wins. Charlie Condon was just a force and essentially took over the college baseball world from a narrative perspective. Obviously, such a cool story. Ends up getting drafted super high in the Major League Baseball draft, and you kind of think, well, Charlie's leaving. He was their bell cow, and how do they turn that around? And oh ho hum, they come back, win 42 games, lead the nation in home runs, fifth in runs scored, and 8 guys with double-digit home runs. So what has it been like watching this team, and what has stuck out to you most to kind of create the energy that's going in Athens right now for the Diamond Dogs?
Yeah, really quickly before that, your note on Coastal. I'm watching Florida in that regional because I think
Yeah.
Florida got a really good matchup, and somehow it seems like almost every single year at this point, they start off slow, they get hot, and then they end up in
Mm-hmm.
Omaha somehow. But moving on to Georgia, as far as what stood out about this team, you kind of mentioned it with a lot of players having double-digit home runs, but it is a really deep team. And that's
Mm-hmm.
just not offensively, it's on the mound as well. That's something that Wes Johnson has been really honest with us about. He felt that Georgia didn't have enough arms to get to Omaha last year. They sort of relied on the same guys down the stretch. It tired them out, whether it was that Brian Zeldin, Christian Maracna, Chandler Marsh, a bunch of other guys. They kind of just tuckered out, and we saw it in its super regional with NC State. It just ran out of pitching. So that's something that he really focused on this offseason. He went out through the transfer portal, brought in a couple of really good freshmen, one of which Nate Taylor, but really bolstered that bullpen through the portal, got a bunch of guys, whether it was an injury, whether it was just underperforming, that using all of his analytical stuff, he really thought could perform well on this team, in this ballpark, in the SEC. And credit to him, most of them have paid off. But as for the offense, same kind of thing. He's talked about he did a Moneyball approach. I'm sure you've probably seen the movie, but he got a bunch of guys that could hit instead of going out and getting that 30 plus, 40 plus home run guy. He just got a bunch of guys that he thinks could hit well in Foley Field, similar to the pitching, using all the analytical matchup things that he does. He got some guys that were projected to have success in the ballpark, and they have. So that's kind of how he's built it.
The transfer portal thing is crazy to me, right? We live in obviously such a different world in the college sports landscape, and there's so much variability in roster. But here's the thing, right? You go out and get guys, there's not necessarily a guarantee that they're going to hit and be successful. And I think what is so brilliant about what Coach Johnson was able to do in the portal is not just the guys he added, but that pretty much across the board, the guys he's added have had monster years. I mean, you think about Robbie, you think about Ryland, you think about Brian Curley, you think about Daniel Jackson. I mean, we're talking big time players. Nolan McCarthy. There's all these guys that have put up massive numbers. And I think the other cool thing is outside of Nolan McCarthy, you're pulling them really from mid majors.
Yeah.
You know, UNC Asheville, Miami of Ohio, VCU, Wofford. And so I think to do that shows a lot of forethought as it pertains to that Georgia coaching staff and going out and saying, hey, look, we're not just going to grab guys, we're going to grab our guys and the guys that we think will fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of just mentioned it right there, but that's one thing. Yes, there's no formula to say whether or not this guy's going to succeed, but the way Georgia relies on its analytics, and Wes Johnson calls them its matchup predictors, he really can look at a guy, look at what he did the season before, and say, yes, this guy's going to succeed in Foley Field. Maybe he hits homers to right field where it's 314 feet. Maybe there's something about his swing that plays well. He can really analyze that and see if it's going to pay off like a part of this team, a part of this ballpark, and we've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I think all that's dead on, and I think too, you know, to understand not just your roster and what you need, but the dynamic and the environment that you're going to play in. Because you mentioned Foley, and I think that's part of it too, is play to your dimensions, play to the areas of the field that are going to fit guys' strengths. And they've obviously used that to their advantage. So on Foley, talk to me about this too, and not just from a playing confines perspective, but from an environment perspective. What kind of advantage is that for Georgia? Obviously, they had such a great record at the home field this morning, really, or this season, really protected Foley. And then obviously, the mantra "feed the trees" is kind of there with it. Like so many cool things going there. I think the environment and what the athletic department has done to build that environment are all fantastic. How imposing a venue is that going to be this weekend for the teams coming into play?
I really think it's just a comfortability factor for Georgia. They're sleeping in their own beds, it's kind of like any team. They're going through their same routine, know the drive to the ballpark. So they're really a lot more comfortable, and I think we've seen that reflected within its record. But as far as the fans, like you just mentioned, shout out to Georgia because it really invested in its baseball program this year. And Wes Johnson knows, Georgia knows, Josh Brooks knows, Georgia's never going to be the biggest ballpark. It's never going to be that Alex Box Stadium we see in LSU. It's never going to be a couple of other stadiums. But they've constructed it in a way with the confines, and by confines I mean kudzu hill and right field they don't want to disturb, the tennis courts they don't want to disturb. But they've taken all that into account and made it the best it can be by elevating it. So a bunch of the players in West Johnson often talk about how it feels like the crowd is on top of you, and that's because the crowd is up besides that dugout club area. And they've also made the facilities really nice, whether it's the new pitching lab, the hitting lab, a bunch of other technological advancements it's made. It's definitely made improvements to Foley and invested in baseball.
Yeah, I think too, just from an atmosphere perspective and where it sits on campus, it really is cozy and I think fits into the aesthetic of the campus so well. But then also, like, it's a great place to watch a ball game. So as a fan, it's an awesome place to go in and take in the game. And I mean, you mentioned Kudzu Hill, like, what a cool spot that is. And I just,
That's
yeah,
gonna be
I think
rocking.
Oh, it's going to be rocking. Yeah, it's going to be electric. And, hopefully, even though I know they got dinged on Friday with the noon game, hopefully they'll get a night game. We'll see some home runs and some
Hmm.
red lights and all the good things. Yeah,
Yeah, all you gotta
it,
do is win and you'll get it.
that's right. So it's a cool environment. Back to Coach Johnson because I am interested in this. He comes in, has immediate success, 2 straight years, 40 plus wins. I don't care where you are in America. If you win 40 games in a college baseball season, it's been an outstanding year. And to do that back to back years, I think is beyond impressive. But what have you seen from him from a culture building perspective, from a establishing kind of a standard of excellence perspective, and what he's done to shift this Georgia program into the excellence I think everyone expects?
I think it's just the belief factor. I remember watching Georgia Baseball posted something on Instagram. The minute, I think it was his first meeting in fall or in the off season with the team, he put something on the board and it said, "Do you guys think you can get to Omaha?" And a bunch of the team was like, "Yeah, we kind of do," but it was just that team speak that you're supposed to have. But he really flipped a switch to where this team now believes that it doesn't just want to get to Omaha, but it truly believes it can win. And I think that does come with a little bit of success. You look at last year's team, it was kind of a hodgepodge, just a bunch of guys, maybe some from mid majors, maybe some that didn't perform, and then a couple returners. But they saw the success that that team had. Now, speaking about this year's team, and they know they could be even better. So, as far as Wes Johnson, I really think he's just instilled belief within this program. He talks about it all the time. The players talk about it all the time. One of the transfers actually said, "The one time Wes Johnson is going to get mad at you is if you don't believe in yourself." And I think he's really held true to that, and we've seen it within the results. This team really does believe.
Do you think the experience last year where they are on the doorstep for Omaha, and in a lot of ways, and this is just my opinion, but I felt like they were a year early. I didn't think that was necessarily the expectation to be right there going to Omaha last year. And so I do wonder, I know there was roster turnover and there's new guys in the portal, but how much from a belief perspective now these guys go, wait a minute, like we belong. We're supposed to be in this conversation. We're supposed to be one of the teams that folks are talking about going to lift up a trophy.
Absolutely, because you look at the history of Georgia, and yes, it's been a solid baseball program, but the fact of the matter is it hasn't made it to the College World Series since 2008. And since then hasn't really been thought about as a program that you go to make it to Omaha to win the national championship. And Wes Johnson's really changed that culture. And to answer your question, that's something that a bunch of the guys have talked about this year too, is we saw what that team can do, and now we know this team can do it, and we're going to be a part of the reason that they do. So I definitely think last year's success played into the mindset of this year's team within that belief factor.
Talk to me about the pitching staff here, because it's my belief, watching them and following them over the year, that they are definitely a sum of its parts pitching staff. They don't have, say, one or two guys that are leading the charge and are going to go be day one guys in the major league draft. But of note, particularly, I find Brian Curley's story to be really compelling. Number one, VCU transfer, comes into the program, starts in the bullpen, obviously has a big viral moment where everybody kind of goes, who is this Brian Curley kid? And then makes the transition into the starting role and has really been a revelation. And from my vantage point, kind of flipped the perspective on what their season could become, because he kind of gives them a bell cow to say, okay, we got a guy now that we know we're going to get innings out of and is going to keep us in the ballgame.
Definitely. I was thinking about this earlier today. Last season, Wes Johnson decided to move Corey Collins into the leadoff position, and that was seen as one of the monumental moments, monumental decisions of the season. This year, it's that decision to move Brian Curley into that starting rotation, because not only did it give Georgia some length, give Georgia some consistency in that Friday night role, it also allowed the bullpen guys to sort of settle into their positions. You look at what Zach Harris has done in that closing role. You look at some of the setup guys. There's a few other guys that know they're sort of the longevity guys, the length guys, can stretch them out. So it's really not only solidified that starting rotation, but it's also helped the bullpen out.
On this Georgia team this year, or on this roster, whether it's a player story, whether it's a team angle, whatever it may be, what has been your most surprising thing about this season's Georgia baseball team?
Surprising. That's a good question. I feel like there's so many things you can think of, whether it's the season that Slade Alford has had after having an opportunity to play professionally last season, coming back, turning it down, saying, I want to work on my defense, I want to work on my speed. He slimmed up a little bit, and you've seen the effects of it pay off. Whether it's a guy like, I don't know, all the transfers that came in that maybe weren't having that much success, but something about just playing as part of this team makes them hit another level. There's a bunch of good pitching stories, whether you look at Leighton Finley's season, but honestly, I just talked about him. What Zach Harris has done in that closing role, I don't think the guy's walked a guy in his last however many outings. Actually, asked Wes Johnson about that post game, and he said that I probably jinxed them. So if he walks somebody, it's definitely my fault, but I think he's really just taken that opportunity and run with it, because last year he was the midweek starter, actually ended up starting game 3 of the Super Regional, the winner go home game, but started out as the midweek starter this year, didn't have too much success, but according to Wes Johnson, he told him that he wants more pitching opportunities. He wants to pitch in a variety of different roles. So Wes kind of just threw him into the closer role because they couldn't really find anybody to go there after Curley got moved to the rotation, and he's embraced it. So I think what he's done this season has definitely been surprising, but really cool to see.
Okay, answer this question for me. If Georgia makes it to Omaha, this went well. If they don't make it to Omaha, this didn't go well.
I think if Georgia makes it to Omaha, it's going to have a sound offensive approach, because yes, the pitching staff has stepped up a lot this season, but at the end of the day, this team was built on its offense. It's playing at home, so you don't have many excuses for not hitting home runs. But the time when Georgia gets in trouble is when Wes Johnson always talks about, he calls it eliminating the illusion of competition. And what that means is when you're in the batter's box, another team's on the mound, you're in a playoff situation, you got 3,000, almost 4,000 around you. You can't make the moment bigger than it is. You have to stay within your offensive approach. You have to take your pitches. You have to lay off of the ones that go outside of the zone, especially from lefties that we've seen. And so if Georgia makes it to Omaha, I think it will have a sound offensive approach. If it doesn't make it to Omaha, I believe part of the reason is because it doesn't eliminate the illusion of competition.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. I think one of the things you're concerned about if you look at this Georgia team is a lot of long balls, tons of light tower power up and down that lineup. But the flip side of that is, as comes with big power, they strike out a lot too. And so
Mhm.
I feel like I had coaches all throughout when I was playing, always talk about, you put the ball in play, good things happen. And I think even look, you go back to that NC State game in game 3 of the Super Regional last year, they barely get the ball out of the infield and they put up a crooked number to kind of put the game out of the reach early. And that's just the benefit of getting the ball in play as opposed to striking out. So yeah, I agree. I think that's a great point. If they can be diligent with pitch selection and really elongate at bats and give themselves a shot to get a pitch in the zone, boy, that lineup is scary. Just because I feel like crooked numbers can happen so quickly. Um, yeah,
Absolutely.
tell me this: do you think what starter has to take things up a notch for Georgia to get where they want to go and hoist the trophy come June?
Pitching starter or a guy that's starting in the lineup?
Yeah, starting pitcher.
Pitching, Leighton Finley,
Yeah.
because I think Brian Curley is going to go out there. He may not always be on. We saw it against Texas A&M. We saw it against Alabama. Had a little bit of trouble with command, but he's still going to give you 5 innings. And Leighton Finley has been incredibly solid for Georgia recently, but he occasionally has that one rough outing where teams just hit him well, whether it's a big first inning, a big second inning. And so if he can get back to the Leighton Finley that was this team's Friday night starter last year, I think that's going to propel Georgia another level. And then another guy that I'm looking at is JT Quinn, because chances are
Ooh.
you're probably going to see Curley or Finley in game 1, probably going to see the other one in game 2. So who's going to step up in game 3? And I think JT Quinn could be that guy. He's really proven himself recently. Solid start in the SEC tournament, solid appearances a couple weekends before that. So I think he could be a sneaky dark horse candidate for the starting rotation.
JT Quinn's a really good one. Because I think if he pitches well, it just gives them some depth that I don't know that people necessarily expect. And just
Absolutely.
keeping them in the ball game is paramount for that offense because they're fireworks at any time. So they just can't have the deficit be too big. I think that's the struggle there. All right, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, so I'm putting you on the spot. But if you had to prognosticate the bracket today as it sits before things get started this weekend, who do you expect to make it to Omaha? Who are your 8 that you expect to be playing in Nebraska?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd have to pull up the bracket to make sure I don't get any duplicates, but I think a lot's going to come from the SEC. I would probably say 4 to 6 are from the SEC. Keeping the bracket out of mind in case I get teams that are in the same super regional matchup. I think some teams that are hot right now, Texas, really good season. Didn't do as
Mm-hmm.
well down the stretch, still started off really well. I think LSU at home is incredibly hard to beat. I think Florida has a shot at advancing out of that coastal regional. It seems super hot right now. I think I'm looking at the Athens potential super regional. Ole Miss is going to get hard to Ole Miss is going to be hard to beat, but
Yeah.
Georgia's playing at Foley Field, so I'll just plead the fifth on that one. I do think Georgia has a really good shot at advancing to Omaha, but I also think Ole Miss is pretty hot. As far as that, I think UNC is going to be really hard to beat right now. I have no clue how many teams I'm out in my counter right now, but those are probably the top ones that I'm looking at. Maybe see what an FSU can do, see what a couple other teams can do. Not really sold on Oregon or Oregon State, but it should be interesting. A lot of good matchups.
You bring up Ole Miss, which I do find fascinating at the potential of them playing Georgia in the Super because I feel like in a lot of ways those lineups are similarly constructed. They want to bash the baseball around, and I think it can be fun to watch those teams in a 3-game set. Because correct me if I'm wrong, I don't. They did not match up in the regular season. I don't remember seeing them on each other's
They did not.
seeing any of those matches. Yeah, so I think that's fun too because you kind of get to see the depth of the SEC where you have 2 of the best teams that never even get a chance to play each other, and so yeah, I think that would be a really fun matchup. I also wondered too with some of the seeding if there's some hope that Georgia Tech maybe ends up in that slot too to set up that kind of interstate super regional. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating field. Okay, then I'm going to nail it down even further. Who do you expect to be crowned champion in Omaha?
Oh, dang. Let's leave Georgia out of this because I don't want to get in trouble with any Georgia fans. But
Yeah,
a
that's
team
fair.
that
That's
I'm now
fair.
realizing I completely forgot. Yeah, a team that I now realize I completely forgot to mention earlier is Vanderbilt. I think what Vandy's done this last half of the season, very deserving of the number 1 seed. You look, the pitching staff has been dominant the entire season, shut Georgia down for 3 games practically. I know it scored some runs, but still pretty much shut it down. you look, the offense is sort of coming up a little bit, wasn't hitting a lot of home runs to start. That's changed recently, especially with what Brody Johnston, their freshman's doing. And I just think it's hard to bet against a Tim Corbin coached team, especially when it has this much talent. So I think Vandy has a really good shot at taking home the title.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm gonna tell you, if they pitch like they pitched in Hoover, I don't I don't know who beats them. I mean, they just shoved the
Absolutely.
entire tournament. So yeah, I feel like that's the other part about the SEC, right? Is a lot of these characters have been there before. We've had this whole conversation. We've been
Definitely.
talking 30 minutes. We haven't even talked about Tennessee. And like,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
it's easy.
yeah, just reigning national champs. So I mean, it's just there's so much depth there and so much good talent. In my view, and I'm sure you probably feel similarly, college baseball is probably as good as it's ever been
Absolutely.
across the board. You even look at here's one of my stories. I'm a little biased on this too because I have CAA connections and roots. But you look at even a team like Northeastern, right? That's going down to play in Tallahassee. 27-game winning streak they're on currently. They've won 48 games. I mean, there's great stories like that all throughout the game. And yeah, I'm just fired up to watch it. I wish that in some ways there was baseball bracketology and baseball brackets like we do for basketball. Because, man, I just think America's missing out if they're not getting all jacked up about this.
Absolutely. An interesting note on that, I also think it's kind of cool to see how it shifted where players are staying in college longer
Mm-hmm.
instead of going to the minor leagues because the way college baseball's heading right now, the college facilities, especially in the SEC, the ACC, are probably on par, if not even a step better than what you're getting in the minor leagues. So I think that's contributed to it a lot as well in terms of just it's a more veteran league now, a lot better improvement as far as individual player wise. So it's definitely cool to watch.
That's a great point. And from like the NIL perspective too, I do feel like it's positively affected baseball because you're giving
Absolutely.
kids an opportunity to get a little bit of cash, stay and develop their game. And to your point, you shorten the Major League Baseball draft, so there's less opportunity there. And look, it's got to be like the Ritz playing college baseball versus being on a bus traveling to Bluefield or something like that, right? So I mean, yeah,
Definitely.
that's a really good point. I'm glad you bring that up. Well,
Yeah, definitely.
well, look, Olivia, we so appreciate your time. I know you are super busy. Please tell our listeners how they can follow you and support you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Olivia K. Sayer, and then a bunch of articles, especially this week with the postseason starting on Dogs 24/7. And then I'm also interning with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, so some professional coverage will be on that website.
Look, y'all make sure and follow Olivia. If y'all have listened to this show for the last half hour and don't realize how great she is, then I don't really know what to tell you. Her coverage is outstanding. She is a must follow for Georgia baseball. So please make sure and follow her, especially for this Athens Regional this weekend. So Olivia, thank you so much for the time, and you are welcome back anytime.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and thank you so much for the kind words.